Grieving the Holy Spirit is not the same as blasphemy against the Spirit. For that matter, grieving the Spirit is not necessarily the same as a serious or gross sin. Well, what's the difference between these three expressions? Mark 3:29 mentions blasphemy against God's Holy Spirit. Notice what it says about this action. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit has no forgiveness forever, but is guilty of everlasting sin. Blasphemy against the Spirit is said to be an everlasting sin. So it is that our publications often use the term blasphemy against the Spirit and sinning against the Spirit interchangeably. Matthew 12:31 and 32 further expands on our understanding of blasphemy or sinning against the Holy Spirit. This kind of sin is termed in these verses as unforgivable sin. Very serious indeed. Matthew 12:31 and 32 says, "For this reason I say to you, every sort of sin and blasphemy will be forgiven men, but the blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. For example, whoever speaks a word against the Son of Man," that's Jesus, "it will be forgiven him. But whoever speaks against the Holy Spirit, it will not be forgiven him. No, not in this system of things, nor in that to come." A most tragic prospect for any who sin against the Holy Spirit. Well, what kind of sin might that be? Well, first of all, you notice in verse 31, Jesus said, every sort of sin will be forgiven. Even very serious, gross sin can be forgiven. So if you've sinned in the past in a serious way, you're not at all a lost cause. You see, Jehovah is merciful. If we sin and we're truly repentant, even if we've been severely disciplined, we can be forgiven. For the verse said, every sort of sin will be forgiven. In fact, did you notice Jesus' further statement? He said that a person who speaks against Jesus has the possibility of being forgiven, whereas one that blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven forever. Now, why is that? The reason is that Holy Spirit has God as its very source. The Holy Spirit is expressive of God's own personality. So saying things against or denying the Holy Spirit is the same as speaking against Jehovah himself. Now, Jesus was here referring to those who willfully, deliberately opposed an operation of God's Holy Spirit. Well, do we have an example of some who did just that? They blasphemed or sinned against the Holy Spirit? Look back in the context of Jesus' statement in Matthew chapter 12. Jesus had used the power of the Holy Spirit to cure a man. Notice how the Jewish religious leaders spoke against that obvious, miraculous use of Holy Spirit. Matthew 12:22 first. It says, "Then they brought him a demon-possessed man who was blind and speechless, and he cured him so that the speechless man could speak and see." That was indisputable evidence of the operation of Jehovah's Holy Spirit. The crowds recognized that. The Pharisees did not. Well, let's read verses 23 and 24. Well, all the crowds were astounded and began to say, "May this not perhaps be the son of David?" At hearing this, the Pharisees said, "This fellow does not expel the demons except by means of Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons." Instead of acknowledging the power of Jehovah's Holy Spirit, many Pharisees spoke against it, attributing the healing of the man to Satan, the devil himself. Consider also the case of Judas Iscariot. He betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Consider, when Jesus came down to earth as a human, that was a manifestation of the power of Jehovah's Holy Spirit. Judas arranged for his death. That is why at John 17:12, Jesus called him the son of destruction. Judas sinned against the Spirit. He poisoned his relationship with Jehovah, a sin that could never be canceled out, irreversible. So blaspheming the Holy Spirit is related more to the motive, the heart condition, the degree of willfulness, more so than to a specific type of sin. But that is not for us to judge. Jehovah knows who is worthy of a resurrection and who is not. Well, clearly, we do not even want to come close to sinning against Jehovah's Holy Spirit, as did Judas and some of the false religious leaders in the first century. Let's change now to another expression, serious